The Story of the Three Spinners. Once upon a time, there was a young woman who was very lovely but also very lazy. Her least favorite chore was spinning flax into yarn. She hated this chore so much that she constantly argued with her mother over doing it. One day, she and her mother got into such an argument that the mother began to yell and the girl began to cry. Just then, a kind queen just happened to be passing by and she heard the commotion. She stopped by the house and asked what was the matter, as they were so loud she heard them from outside as she passed in the street. She looked at the girl as she was crying loudly, and her mother was too embarrassed to admit that they were arguing because the daughter was too lazy to do her chores. Instead, she told the queen, "Oh, thank you for checking on us, queen. You see, my daughter loves to spin flax into yarn so much. It's all she'll do day and night. But I'm just too poor to afford enough flax for her to spin all the time. And she's crying because I have no more flax for her to spin today." The queen was amazed at this, and she thought it would be very nice to have someone working in the palace who loved to spin so much. And she offered to take the girl with her to the palace, where she could spin as much flax as she wanted. The mother thought that it would be a very, very fine idea for her daughter to live in the palace and have a job working for the queen. So she sent her daughter right away with the queen. Well, the girl thought living in the palace sounded like a lovely idea, but she absolutely did not want to spin flax into yarn. When they arrived at the palace, the girl was amazed to see how wonderful everything was in the palace. And she even got to meet the prince, who was very impressed that this young and beautiful woman was such a hard worker and loved to spin flax so much. In fact, he told his mother he might even like to marry this girl who seemed like such a hard worker. The queen showed the girl to a room, in fact, 3 rooms full of flax, and told her that she wouldn't mind having her for a daughter-in-law if she was as hard-working as her mother said she was and could spin all this flax into yarn. Then, if she'd like, she could marry the prince. Well, the girl thought marrying the prince sounded like a wonderful idea, but not so much spinning all that flax. She would never be able to spin 3 whole rooms full of flax into yarn. So once again she began to cry. She sat in the room near the window, full of all the flax, and she cried and she cried. She cried so loudly that 3 women who were passing by outside heard her crying and approached her window to see what was the matter. When the 3 kind old women peered into the window with the girl, she saw that they all had a very strange appearance. One of them had 1 foot that was hugely swollen, while the second one had a gigantic bottom lip that hung down past her chin, while the third woman had 1 very, very wide, flat thumb. They were very strange looking, but they were very kind, and they asked the girl what was the matter. The girl told them her problems and how she had to spin all of this flax into yarn so that she could marry the prince, and she'd never be able to do it all. Well, the 3 old women said they'd be delighted to help her on one condition. They asked that she would invite them to her wedding and introduce them as her aunts and let them sit in an important spot with the family during the wedding. Oh, the girl was so happy. She thanked the women over and over again and said she'd be so happy to invite them to her wedding if they could help her. So the three women came inside and they started working right away. The first woman, with the huge foot, began to use her foot to tread the pedal on the spinning wheel. The second woman used her big fat lip to wet the threads. The third woman used her big, broad thumb to spin the yarn, and then she would wrap her thumb upon the table, and in an instant a beautiful bunch of yarn would appear. The three women were able to spin all 3 rooms full of flax into the most beautifully made yarn in no time at all. And when the queen came to see how the girl had progressed, she was amazed to see that all of that flax had been spun into the finest yarn. She was so happy that they made preparations for the wedding immediately. The girl said she had one favor to ask of her new husband, and that was she would like to invite her 3 aunts to the wedding. Well, the prince and his family agreed that she should certainly invite her family to the wedding. So when the wedding day came and the new bride was dressed in the finest wedding gown, and there was music and feasting, along came 3 very, very strange guests to the wedding. The 3 old women were dressed in their finest colorful dresses, but everyone could not help but notice that the first woman had an extremely large swollen foot. The second woman had a lip that was so long it hung down below her chin, and the third woman had a huge and flat thumb. The prince was amazed to see them and couldn't help but ask why it was the ladies appeared like this. Oh, the 3 kind old ladies just smiled. And the first one said, "Oh, my foot is so broad from pressing the pedals on the spinning wheel." The second woman said, "Oh, my lip is so long from wetting the thread." The third said, "My thumb is so large from twisting the thread." The prince was horrified to see what might happen to his beautiful bride if she spent all day and all night spinning, and he told his bride that he'd be very happy if she should never spin yarn again. The 3 old women smiled and winked at the new bride, who grinned and told her new husband that if it made him happy, she'd be very glad to never spin again. And then they lived happily ever after.